I'd like to welcome everyone and call this is an official meeting of the Board of Finance, but we always refer to it as the Tri-Board, and we're delighted to have both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education here, along with the board members and staff locally. So it'd be great to have you there. Let's have you with us. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. I want to start with just a note that I was very pleased yesterday walking around the reservoir down in Avon at Fisher Meadows to run into Burke Leclerc. And
how wonderful.
It was great to see him. He recognized me. We had a nice little chat, was walking with his wife and a friend. I think Maria and Amy know Matt from Mansfield, and a really good chat. He was, it seemed like, good spirits, lucid, very, very conversational. I suspect some of you have seen or talked to him, but it was really, really nice to see him. It was.
That's great news.
Yeah, I felt.
He's walking well. That's great.
Yeah, he went all the way around the road for at least a mile. So yeah, good for him. So that was really good news. Our first order of business tonight, which is Board of Finance business, we'll get rid of and get out of the way. Excuse me. And then we can get down to the business at hand, which would be the approval of minutes. And again, Karen did a nice job for us on these. Not sure who's taking our minutes tonight, but were there any comments among the board members? Pretty detailed. So I take a motion to approve and accept those.
So moved.
From Kevin. Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Rob, one abstention, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Lisa was not present at the meeting. All right. So the purpose of tonight is not to try to be bored, but to have the tri-boards get together and talk about the budget planning process going forward. We host this, but this is a joint meeting. We really would like to have a dialogue between the boards. And, to that end, we offered, as a Board of Finance, some information and guidelines, and Amy has put together a packet to discuss this. But I guess I would just like to hear from both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed, whether it's the chairman or the staff, special thoughts or things you'd like to try to accomplish tonight.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see folks. Hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving. I guess, Rob, on our end, one important factor in our planning as we just are initiating the capital piece of things is coming off of a year-long, what was a very public conversation about our facilities and enrollment planning work. I know my board is very interested in moving forward with that first phase, that first project. So I guess leaving tonight with an understanding of how we define that decision-making process and what that looks like in terms of moving forward on the capital side. I'll kind of wait to hear where we are on the guidance side for any input I have on the operating budget, but the capital is certainly at the forefront of where our efforts have been in the last year or so.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Yep.
And I'll just jump in quickly in terms of our timeline and process. So we start a bit later than the Board of Ed, and we have our kickoff meeting with the department heads on the town side this Friday morning. And folks' base budgets are due to us in early January, and we really spend the months of January and February working on the development of our base operating and capital budget. So that work is coming up. Obviously, we've been really focused almost now for a year on our pandemic response, and it looks like we'll be continuing that into the future. So, providing those critical and essential services And we've really seen an increase in demand for our services during this time period. So that will definitely be a focus, as well as trying to advance a number of the Board of Selectmen's goals and priorities, which we included for you in the packet this evening.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Anything from the board, Susan, Selena, from the board perspective, Board of Ed?
I think I would just certainly count for us leading into COVID. And then really all our focus has been on reopening schools and doing it safely and all the work that went into that. So rolling forward, I think we're interested to hear what you all are thinking. We know we have areas that we're going to need to address as a result of COVID and the kids being in school not as much as we would have liked. So we have our own areas to address, but I think we're anxious to hear where you all are going to take the conversation.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe Eric from the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'm interested in better understanding the context behind the guidance that we're going to get from the Board of Finance, and then some of your early thinking on some of the items that I think that may be within the Board of Finance's purview, but are really the responsibilities of this collective group. And one of the things I'm thinking about is continuing to make progress on our pension obligations, which obviously, will impact our budget. So that's what I'm hoping to get from tonight. Thank you.
Great, appreciate that. So to set the sort of context for this, we did, as a Board of Finance, have a meeting last week in which we went through, and I give a lot of kudos to Lisa, who unfortunately couldn't be with us last week, but the guidelines, the guidance that we want to share with you, or the context in which we want the collective group here to think about how we create a budget for the 21-22 fiscal year. And we've already touched on a few of those topics. One is capital. We think capital will be a really important topic. We can certainly get to it tonight, but we also firmly believe we need a comprehensive gathering and meeting of the minds on how we're going to approach capital both in the near term and longer term. This seems to be a perennial discussion we have. We need and are dedicated to making some progress this year. And so part of that will be having a clearer picture of both the baseline needs, the short-term needs, and the long-term needs. So we will anticipate that we'll have a group meeting like this again, or some method by which we can discuss capital. The second issue is to deal with costs and expenses and revenue adjustments that are impacted by the pandemic and COVID. And so I think this year it will be very important to segregate expenses and unusual items, both good and bad, that are directly related to the pandemic and the situation we continue to find ourselves in. I think nobody really has a good idea when this will end, but we are hopeful that we'll get past this sometime in that fiscal year of 21 to 22. In doing so, if you can segregate those unusual or different expenses, it'll be easier for us to compare that budget to the previous year's budget and previous year's actual, and have a context in which we would look at how long those expenses might be carried on and whether, what will happen to them in subsequent years. It'll be important when we do comparisons from one to the other. And now I'm zoning out because I'm doing this on the fly, but Eric, what was the other concept you had was, just the context of overall background. And I think to that end, we produced this document called a budget framework for the fiscal year 22. Again, a lot of hard work went into this by Lisa and Amy. A lot of interest, a lot of information gathered. to show the way that we as a Board of Finance think about what we have to do. And a lot of these, these include things like looking at our revenue sources. The primary drivers for us are grand list, obviously the ultimate tax rate, cost of living increases. Big item is the pension. We talked about that. We have, I think, as you know, we started about 2 or maybe even 3 years ago to try to get the pension earnings rate assumption down from 7% to 6.5%. We got it down to 6.75. We wanted to go down again for the year we're in. We did not. We chose not to. Still a goal. Still a pretty important number, a pretty big number, a significant number as it gets spread across both the budgets. So we don't have any final conclusions on that. Our goal remains to get down to 6.5%. But it may be one of those levers that the Board of Finance will choose what we do as we get down to the end of the budget process after looking at expenses and trying to set both the mill rate. We want to remain competitive with other towns in terms of our mill rate. We want to be reasonable about expenses relative to the cost of living. We've given you some information in here. The consumer price index is 1.2, 1.3% up this year from last. Increases in Social Security are nominal for our senior citizens. I think in the order of magnitude of $20 a month. And so we want to be extremely careful about what we do with the ultimate burden of the taxes. And the reality is that we're in a recession, and this whole economic impact of the pandemic has hurt some people tremendously. The people in the service industries, people who have lost their jobs, people who have had hours cut, restaurants are struggling. We know all of this. We don't have to repeat it, but that's the environment in which we live. And we need to be real about it when we look at the budgets that we create. Based on this, we actually did adopt, the Board of Finance, these guidelines and shared them with you in our package. Be glad to talk to you about them. We'll continue to fill out the information as we move forward. There are some other big drivers in the budgets I know you're aware of. The insurance is always one we talk about. The pension contribution, obviously. And then ultimately, the elephant in the room is the amount for debt service and interest as a percentage of our overall budget. We've had a cap at 7%. And as we look forward to Matt's earlier comment about these long-range projects and including the first phase, we're going to have some challenges in terms of how we bond and how that impacts that particular aspect of our overall budget, which in turn impacts the mill rate and the other things that we can do. So we know that this is a long-term, back and forth, iterative process. We appreciate all of the hard work that goes into the qualitative things that you folks work on the Board of Ed, the quality of the education, the programs that we offer, the diversity, the luxury of having neighborhood schools and the ability to be flexible to do both at home and virtual learning. Kudos to everyone for the way you guys managed all of that. And the same thing with the town, the services that we provide, the essential services we need, police and public safety, the roads, plows, all of those things. And then the programs that we provide as well, all very, very important. But we have a tough job ahead of us. And so I'll start with that and glad to answer any questions. I asked maybe Lisa if you wanted to offer any other guidance to our guidance.
Good evening, everyone. Just say thank you to the kind wishes I've received in the last 2 weeks. Greatly appreciated. I think that Rob did a great job summarizing. What we tried to do this year for the first time is put down in writing the context within which we have looked at budgets in the past years. This should not be a surprise. We do it piecemeal throughout the year, and it's part of our process, but we did try to put it on paper because a few people have mentioned to us they didn't understand how we come up with our guidance and how we come up with our approach to budgeting. So we did try to put it down. It is 4 pages. I know it's long. I do encourage people to read it. We did reach out to both boards through Amy and asked her to reach out to all of you to see if you had any input as to what you thought we should consider in terms of overall context of the budget. And I don't believe we received any feedback from either the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education. But I know Rob and I and our board view this as not a static document, but it will change. We've seen, for instance, the unemployment go from 7, it's now at 3.7, but the latest reports are that it's ticking up again. So we'll be watching the unemployment numbers throughout this process. And from our perspective, it's a lot about not only what we need to provide the services we want to provide, are legally required to provide, but it's balanced against what our residents can afford. And I think Rob did a nice job laying out what those parameters are. And if you go to section 4 in the document, you'll sort of see what we're actually going to be doing during the budget process. These are things we always do. There's nothing new there, but these are the decision points that are going to occur during the budget process, just to put it all in writing. Again, this shouldn't be surprising to anyone. We do this every year, but we did put it in writing this year to sort of get everyone on the same page. The one thing we did a little bit differently is in terms of doing comparisons with other towns. We added more debt measurements there because we're contemplating a major debt investment. So we really wanted to make sure we understood how our debt obligations compare with other towns. And that's all I have, Rob. Okay,
great. So, based on our discussion at our meeting, and this is the hard part, is to come up with a single guideline. And, in the past, we've had the feeling and had heard it expressed that this seems like arbitrarily low, designed to make the boards run around crazy trying to find cuts that they can't find. But the reality is, and we do also understand that there's a great deal of complexity underneath these budgets that isn't as simplistic as saying, a single percentage. But we would like very much to start by having the guideline be focused on expenditure increases from year to year. And so that guidance that comes out of the Board of Finance is a 1.5% increase. And you say, well, wait a minute, our salaries are 3%. How are we going to get there? Well, we recognize that this will be difficult, but there's program services, enrollment trends, everything else. We are, and I understand that there are also costs of supplies and everything else for the town, but we've got to figure out how to do more with less. The basic fact that the grand list is going to go up less than 1.5% this year. That's what drives the taxes we charge. It's just that simple. We didn't have the jump that we've had in a couple of past years. So I'll stop now and look for some reaction and dialogue about this. This is not us telling you what you have to do. This is intended to be a dialogue between all of us and challenges and the like, and I'll take it from there. Okay, there being none.
For me, Rob, I think as I did look, Lisa, through the big document, and I wanted to wait to have a discussion to make sure I sort of understand where you all were headed, rather than to give you feedback just on reading it, because I think context is always important. And to be honest, this was eye-opening, and some of the towns you choose are interesting to me. I'm not sure how you arrive at the comparison districts. But it was certainly interesting to see how it lays out. I will say that I as far as enrollment projections, I noticed that you noted we were down 65 students, and that's something we expect to come back to us, that it was really a COVID-related drop in enrollment. And so we do expect to see those students joining us next year. And I just think we have a lot of work to do around, when the vaccine comes out, when can we change class sizes? There's so many things that are in the balance that we are going to be hard to plan for us rolling forward. It's going to, unfortunately, as you say, it's going to take time, and everything has to be flexible until we get a handle on sort of where we're headed into the next school year.
I appreciate that. And Neil shared with us the sort of repurposing of people at our meeting last week, which I think was well received by the Board of Finance. It's that kind of flexibility and agility that is really, really regarded. And this goes to my point of, to the best we can, trying to separate things that we have to do because of the pandemic, things that we want to do for other reasons, and things that might revert. Totally get the whole kindergarten thing with kids that may or may not show up for first grade. They may come back to kindergarten. They may stay home forever. We don't know. We can't really predict that. But we need processes that allow us to be as agile as we were this year, which is, again, much appreciated.
Rob?
Yeah.
Just to answer Susan's question on the comparison towns, these were the towns picked by Maria last year that we had in our budget books that we did a comparison with. If you would like us to add other towns, we're open to it. I think the thinking there was from a Board of Finance perspective, when someone buys a house, they look at generally these types of towns all together. So we were doing it more from if you look at the chart that does the snapshot, where you just compare Simsbury and Avon, and you do the $350,000 house, you'll see the tax differential is about $1,000 a year. And so we were just trying to do, if you were coming to Connecticut in this area and we're looking at towns, but we are certainly, like we had mentioned earlier, we're certainly open to adding other comparison points if you would like us to do that, which is why we had put that out there to both boards earlier. I think we put it out in 2 meetings requesting that information, but as we said, it's not a static document, so happy to add it. If you have suggestions, please send them our way and we can add that.
Will do. Thanks.
I have a couple comments, Rob, if that's okay.
Sure, Wendy.
So just reading through Lisa's document and knowing what, after going through my first budget last year, so I'm getting a little bit more knowledgeable. Just coming out of this out of COVID, and I don't see it ending anytime before the next budget kicks off. I really feel that the mill rate really should stay flat. I mean, I know that's common sense for all of us, but given the impact to the residents in the town and a lot of the promises that we've made to our residents of trying to keep taxes lower, given everything that we've been through, people losing jobs and things like that. I don't know what, additional expenditures and services we're going to be asking for this year. So I can't say that, but I just feel that keeping that mill rate low, because we kept it flat pretty much last year, and then to bump it up in the COVID year is just not a good thing for our residents. So that's one of my comments. The other comment is last year going through that whole pension, the 6.75 to the 6.5, and we tried to make other figures work. I believe we made a promise that we were going to tackle that this year along with the mortality tables. Mm-hmm. So that seems like something that we should try to hold to if possible. And then the third thing that I'm really interested in doing is the whole look at the capital projects as a whole, because, Meadowood's been floating around for the year that I've been here. I was on the facilities enrollment task force, and, we finally settled on the option. And that's a lot of money to compete, right, for our capital projects. So, I was just thinking to look at all of those together. And also, I believe I heard that there's $2.8 million for Board of Ed maintenance work. I think Jason said that on one of the last Board of Ed calls. So all those going in together to be looked at as a whole, to me, would make it much not easier, but reality, what are you going to cut versus what we're going to actually go with? So those are kind of my three key areas that I feel, I need to address this budget season.
Rob, could I jump in real quick? On
Yeah,
the
please, sure.
side? I appreciate the thought and the planning about segregating the COVID expenditures. I think having a way to really talk through those things, the impact of them, is important in the budget process. I just wanted to hit order of magnitude, little bit of stating the obvious, but when, for us, when we look at a 3% fixed cost and we talk about a 1.5 guideline, I mean, it's about $1.2 million in reductions, which is the equivalent of 15 to 17 full-time staff, in terms of looking at that. And you think about where we sit now, and I appreciate the comments on how we reallocated staff this year to make this work. I think that's a big piece of the reason why we, with some of the aid from the CARES money, can live within kind of the means this year. But there are definitely going to be some concerns on the gap side of this thing, and staff that would deliver those services, it may be a challenge. We just may have some competing priorities we'll really need to talk through. So I completely appreciate the work you and Lisa and the board put in to define these things, but order of magnitude, it's an ask beyond any I've seen in my tenure as superintendent in terms of potential reductions.
Yeah, Robin, and this is Sean. If I could just jump on from what Matt's getting at, and let me know if you guys can hear me. My internet's been in and out. But one of the things that I noted that was missing in the budget context is the actual costs of service. And again, I'm guilty of using the word arbitration or arbitrarily coming up with a number, because nowhere in the document or the discussion do I see a factor for the actual costs going up. I see a lot of affordability, and I understand that. But as Matt just articulated, there's a reality of the cost of services that doesn't appear to be contemplated in the document, and from what I saw, contemplated in the guidance.
I can speak to that, Rob.
Yeah, please.
Sean, thank you for that. Actually, that comes on your side as you look to it. We did get the document from both Maria and Amy as to the costs of service. So we did have that information. And I do appreciate that. Amy, if you have that, if you could put that up, that might be helpful for people to see that we did actually look at the information that was provided to us by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education for cost of service increase, just that. I don't know, Amy, if you have that. And then the second thing, to Matt's point about concern about actual costs, I would say a couple of things. One, the estimates that we had are salary projections, which have not yet taken into account the new hires that you have made throughout the year. So that number will naturally come down because your new hires presumably are younger and being hired at a lower salary. So that number will be more favorable to you. At this point, you're not utilizing any of the excess reserves to lower the premium and health costs. So that number will naturally come down during the budget process. And the November grand list projections are generally very conservative in November, and they get slightly better as we get closer to March. So that number will come out more in your favorability. One of the things, Matt, you may not be aware of, I don't know how closely you follow our meetings, but we did transfer quite a bit of money into capital reserve. And in your operating budget, you have a lot of capital. And that capital reserve is not just for the town, it's also for the Board of Ed. So that may be able to be of use if the Board of Finance decides to use it for capital reserves. That will be a pool of money as well, not just for the town, but it's also for the Board of Education, if it is used for that instead of for a pandemic response or feathering in the pension and mortality assumptions. So there are some tools out there, and you do have options of ways to do it. So it's not necessarily 17 full-time equivalents. It might be that you, instead of paying some of the capital out of your operating budget, if we do it out of the capital reserve this year where we have excess reserves. So those are the things we'll sort of be weighing in terms of the levers you'll be able to pull in concert with all of us as we make those decisions collectively. And finally, as the Board of Finance, after we hear from you. So I just wanted to say it's not as dire as perhaps it looks at first, and there this is an iterative process and it changes throughout the coming months.
Can I add something, Rob?
Sure, please.
I just would say, in my past career experience, both in the private sector and in the state, it was not at all unusual to be told, in fact, it happened every year, this is your budget for the year, figure out how to make it work. And it was never a number that was reflective of what I wanted my costs to be or what they naturally would have been. It came down from corporate or from the governor that we need 10% cuts or 5% cuts, and you just had to figure out where to make those. And I'm not trying to be, glib or mean, but this happens all the time, that you can't have everything in the budget that you would like, or that is even necessarily reasonable at times. But Art has raised in the past the notion of going back and looking at labor. And I know you've got contracts. Is there an opportunity to go back and renegotiate those? We have pretty significant raises while people in the private sector are being laid off or taking pay cuts. Are we even having that conversation with labor at this point? And with management raises? Those are things that are within your control. So
I'd like to just respond to that.
Sure.
Our teachers to put themselves in front of these kids every day in a COVID world.
Yep, I get it.
Going back to those teachers and saying to them, we'd like to renegotiate your contract. I just think that's a horrible message. They have been so responsive and so cooperative in this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Not something I would ever want to do.
Okay.
Yeah, and Linda, I would remind you that we don't work for the Board of Finance, so
I didn't say
we
you
work.
did.
Well, you implied it that you tell us what to do.
No,
we work together, and
Right.
again, we're all duly elected by the taxpayers of Simsbury to run the town together. So let's just make sure that we're supposed to work together here.
I did not mean to imply you work for us. We all work for the people that pay taxes. And the people that pay taxes right now are not telling me they want their taxes to go up.
No one wants their taxes to go up, Linda. I think we have all been responsible over many, many years. And I think that we do provide many services to the town, and the people who are providing the services cannot be asked to renegotiate their contracts just because other people have been laid off. That's a very painful thing when we're working so tight and so emotional with all these people that we have working for us that hit a little hard. That's all.
Yeah, and I'd like to just jump in and just speak to the labor component. So our world, particularly in the municipal setting, and I know Matt has a similar set of statutes he's working with, but we're functioning under MIRA, which is the Municipal Employee Relations Act. And so that is a special set of labor law that specifically applies to us as local governments. There are a lot of constraints, including binding arbitration. Affordability to pay is a 9 or 10 prong test. It's not as easy as it's just, it's a tough economic climate. There are numerous factors that are looked at. And what we're seeing with negotiated settlement data statewide is settlements are coming in around 2.25%, and arbitrated settlements are coming in around 2%. So even if we do go to arbitration, which is very costly, the best that we would likely do are 2% general wage increases. And I would just like to reiterate what Susan said. I think it's really important to know how hard our folks have been working during the pandemic. They are essential workers. They are maintaining critical infrastructure. We are doing everything we can to make sure that when somebody calls 911, they get a dispatcher, they get a police officer. We're doing everything we can to make sure that when those blizzards happen this winter, there are people available to plow our roads. We are lean. And right now, because of quarantining that's happening due to the widespread community increase of the virus, we're running thin because we're so lean. And so, our folks are just working incredibly hard right now. And I think to hear that publicly is just a bit discouraging for the workforce.
Well, so let me just reply to all of that. And I certainly apologize for offending anyone, because I certainly value everything that our workforce has done. I'm only trying to point out, since Sean was saying that you have no options except the costs and that we just have to go and pay for them, that I don't believe that that's true. I think there are options. Maybe I'm picking the wrong one, but it is not an uncommon thing that you don't get the budget you want. You get a smaller number than that, and that you have to find ways, and maybe labor is not the way, but that we all need to work together to find ways to live within the budget that our taxpayers can afford.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call a point of order here. Your member continues to insult me and make up things. I never said that. And if this is supposed to be a tri-board meeting,
I'm gonna call a
all right,
timeout.
I need you to step
I'm
in.
gonna,
This
please,
is
please,
vastly
please, just-
inappropriate, Rob.
Hi, it's Chris Peterson. Can I say something?
Chris, you may.
Hey, guys. Happy belated Thanksgiving to every wonderful volunteer out there. Linda, I actually didn't interpret what you said the way you said, nor did I interpret your reference to art that way. What I heard about that was that let's take this year and put it aside, because this has been one of my frustrations since joining this board. And that is, I think we have to be very honest. None of this is going to change at all for us anytime soon. And frankly, if one of the people that are on the finance board or Board of Selectmen or Board of Education who are smarter than people than me and can prognosticate into the future, I don't see a day when our mill rate changes exponentially and our costs don't accelerate every single year, whether our hard good costs or our labor costs. It's just a reality. Tell me when the Board of Finance, great people, not doing anything nefarious, not anything wrong, don't come. Somebody tell me a year where you folks come to us and give us a guidance that is likely equal or larger than what our costs of goods are and our labor. It will never happen. So it's just a reality, and it hasn't happened in the last couple of years. So I'm moving away from my frustration around the words arbitrary. I'm moving towards the dynamic of what Linda's speaking to, which is, and I live in that same world too. This year, the P&L that I run for a public company is going to come under budget, probably 6%. My employees may at best get a 1% raise. Some may get none, and I'm going to say, sorry, folks, that's the reality working for a public company. You guys return shareholder value, okay? And that's just the message that it is. But so I'm comfortable now moving towards the fact that we have expense reductions that are going to have to be made at some point in some places, and these are going to be very difficult. And the good folks from the Parks and Rec staff, we had a really, I think, spirited debate across all the representatives who went to the working group. And, we're going to talk about that a little bit, shifting the cost to the taxpayers to be more current with what occurs every single year from a material cost, from a revenue basis. And the likelihood is there's going to be no real appetite for bearing that increased cost of the tax increase. So it's probably have to come from a service cut someplace. So to me, I think that's my mindset moving forward, is making the very difficult determinations. We talk about plows and cruisers. Maybe one of those plows doesn't happen when it's somewhat scheduled, has always happened, or a cruiser gets replaced. Maybe it doesn't, or labor is going to have to be an issue. It's going to be a very difficult conversation, because again, I don't see you folks, you friends of ours, ever coming to us and saying, hey, spend what you need, increase taxes if you have to, because the trend will never occur in this town or any municipal setting where we have no revenue growth. The revenue growth is not going to grow so exponentially each year that we are going to be able to continue to deliver the same exact goods and services and add to those services. It's just not possible in my mind. So, and take on $200,000 to $300,000 of capital improvement across infrastructure that we're potentially facing. That's my sermon I hope that's my last sermon for tonight.
Thank you, Chris.
I would just add that I believe we have all worked really well together.
Yeah.
And to Chris's point, no, you never say, here's the credit card, go have a party. And we all come in and we reduce our budgets every year and we do our best to meet your guidance. And I think we've all been fair and responsible in that nature. So I think, as you say, we're starting this conversation, and I do apologize because, yes, the labor contracts are very sensitive for me because I do see these teachers and these administrators and how hard everybody has been working nonstop since March 13th, nonstop. So I didn't mean to jump down anybody's throat, but it was that was my gut reaction.
We appreciate your comments. I think to a certain extent, Chris is absolutely right. We are never going to have a situation where the grand list grows faster than our costs, and we're going to have a chance to have a flat or down mill rate and be more competitive with other towns. It is certainly not in my tenure that hasn't happened. One of the things we have to be real about, though, is the taxes are assessed against real property. That's what happens. And if it's not growing as fast as your contractual obligations, whether it's for salaries or road tar or snow plows, it's a really hard thing. And that's all we ask, is that you look really hard at the expenses that you do control. That's really the effort. And, I know most of the people on this Board of Finance, we're not mean people by nature. We don't like playing the bad cop all the time. That's our job. We're the bad cop, but we're the advocates for the taxpayers of the town. We have to be. And that's why we send these messages. And again, I started this by saying I don't like a single number, because if you apply 1.5 to every single expense, it's really hard. It's impossible. But in the aggregate, we do. One of the things we're trying to do this year, though, is I think last year we gave two guidances. One was what we thought we could tolerate in a mill rate increase, and one that we could tolerate in an expense increase. I think the Board of Finance has some levers we have to deal with this year, and that's what the message we're trying to send. The pension plan has been underfunded now for a while. We need to be responsible about that. We have, concerns about some of the really important long-term projects we want to finance, especially at the Board of Ed, and some baseline things that need to be taken care of. We want to be sure we have room in our budget to bond for those and pay the debt service on those. It's really important. We can't kick that can down the road forever. The buildings will collapse. We can't do that. So that's why the budget process requires people to be introspective, be hard on yourselves, and look at things that we need to do. And this isn't, it's not about whether anybody's doing a good job or not doing a good job. It's, can we do it a little more efficiently? Can we do it a little more cheaply? Are there places we can save money? We have to be really, really disciplined about that in this environment. I think that's the message we're trying to send. Not that we have good people or bad people. That's never the message. We have really hard working people. I've always been reminded these are not widgets. These are people that live in town. Some work here, been here with us for a long, long time. Really appreciate that.
Rob, I appreciate your comments. Sean, if I could just jump in for a second. I've sat in hundreds of hours of budget meetings at this point, and I appreciate what you just said, because I think it's particularly frustrating when those of us that have been doing it for a long time or a short time, we do sit in meetings for hours and deliberate over $5,000 line items. And I know you know that and appreciate that. So I just want to make sure that it's acknowledged, and I think it is from what you just said, that we do put in the hard work every year, and we're not asking for a blank check. I've made some pretty awful decisions in my 10 budgets that have impacted people's livelihood, and I've done them in the context of the entirety of what makes sense for the town. And again, an acknowledgement that we're all working really hard to come to the right number, and that I do agree that you're the fiduciary for the taxpayers, but I also see myself as one here in the creation of the Board of Selectmen budget and sending it to you. I don't just send that responsibility off and say, here, you fix it. Board of Finance, we on the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed take it very seriously that what we're sending to you guys is the foundation for running our community, and does impact the taxpayers. So thanks for that, Rob.
I appreciate that. Art.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciated your comment that we have to be tough and disciplined. And I think if there are two things that we all share, one is a huge amount of stress. I just see that with everybody I talk to. You've seen it tonight. And secondly, the comment we hear all the time is we're all in this together. We all have to give something. We will not all get what we want. This has to be a communal effort. And I especially appreciate the fact, what I would like to do is to not have any employees laid off. They've been working hard. They've been under stress. It's been rough. And I would much prefer not to have them let go. If we can retain our employees, and if we can pay them a cost of living increase under these circumstances, frankly, that's going a long, long way, and it's necessary. If, in fact, we could do a cost of living increase and perhaps some salary increase as well, that would even be better. I don't see any way we can do a 3%. And I don't like a suggestion that that's an outrageous thought. It is not at all in any government or any business. I mean, we can't afford 3%. It is not business as usual. And I think we have to face that fact right now.
Lisa? Yeah.
First of all, I worked with all of you a very long time, and I'm very grateful for the effort everyone puts in. I think Art and Linda are speaking to the affordability and what we're sort of seeing on the private side. And just in talking with people, I have friends who have had spouses be laid off, and as I'm sure you have. Some of you yourselves may have been laid off. I don't know. But we're watching, as we watch this process develop, if you feel, and my God, the teachers have been heroes, public works have been heroes, the people who are doing maintenance work have been heroes. And if you want to pay them that amount of money because they're providing just tremendous value, and they certainly are, then maybe you look at what positions you have open where there's not a body, and maybe you don't fill them this year. Maybe that's something that can wait. So you look at all the levers you have, I guess we're saying. And one of the great things that I was able to observe that just amazed me with the talent that we have in town hall and the education is how inventive, creative, and magical our employees were with technology. And this is an opportunity to sort of leverage what we learned into savings. We've seen that remote learning can work. And is there a way to do, we've seen remote town business works. So there are also, while this is a time of great stress, and I do recognize that, and I appreciate it, particularly in my family right now, I appreciate you saying that, Art. It's also a time of invention. And oftentimes we have a choice, I think, I don't remember who said it, during times of crisis to become worse or to become better. And I've seen us become better. And so I just want to applaud what I've seen. And I actually have faith that you can do this. I've looked at the numbers. I've done budgets for over a decade. And I think you can do this. And I think Rob made the important point that we're asking you to segregate COVID costs, because we understand we may look at that differently. This is a one-time. And we also understand our taxpayers may look at that differently if they understand, look, we may have to spend a little bit this year on COVID, but that's going to go away once the pandemic ends. It's a little bit easier to communicate that way. Now, Amy, we're getting conflicting guidance as to whether to put that in the budget or not. I think Connecticut is recommending that we not, so that we can apply for grants. Utah is recommending that you do, because that's the responsible thing to do if it's a known expenditure. But as we develop what to do with it, but at least when you're developing your budgets, think of those two things differently. And that, I think, will help us get through this. So those are my thoughts. And thank you again to everyone.
All right. Well, this is as Art said, this is stressful. It's stressful for all of us. But let's keep the communication open. friendly and cooperative. That's what we need to do. And realize that this is, as Lisa said, is a very much an iterative process. And so,
Hey, Rob, I'll throw my 2 cents in while the floor is generally quiet. I just did some research, in terms of Connecticut. The CBIA has reported that the pandemic has caused, let me back up. I think there's a acknowledgement across the board that everybody's working lean and working hard. I certainly see it in my private sector job, and I know it's happening in the public sector. It's happening all across everywhere, including even our volunteer efforts. But, where I kind of go is the numbers. $2 trillion was injected into our economy that, we took on $2 trillion of basically debt to fund the CARES Act. We saw, 86% of small businesses apply for those CARES Act loans. And here in the state of Connecticut, close to, almost 90%, if not a tick above, are small businesses. 50% of all employees in Connecticut are employees of small businesses. So, just to touch on, in terms of any type of funding, I don't think that can be relied on going forward. Certainly not at a $2 trillion clip year over year. And that money's running out quickly. I'll say that. I mean, in terms of here in the Northeast, you're going to continue to see small businesses, restaurateurs shut down. 200,000 new cases a day upwards. Hospitalizations are going up. I'm not saying that, hey, look, the vaccine is going to go a long way in helping us. Most of us won't see that in the broader public until second quarter, probably the end of second quarter next year. So there's still a lot of pain to be felt here, particularly on the small business side. Like I said, a lot of these businesses don't know what's going to happen in 2021. So I would say that, there are a lot of people out there wishing that, they could work lean and work hard if only they had a job. So I'm not questioning the efforts of anyone. It's just kind of it's the rubber meeting the road in terms of these in terms of the numbers. And that's really what we're here to kind of digest, quantifiably. So those are really my only comments. It's tough, and I'll echo again what Art said. It definitely is stressful. We see it internally, where I work, and I'm sure all of you, with everybody in the house and having kids in the house all the time, and kids learning from school and people working from home. I'm living it, so I totally get it.
I appreciate that. All right. I think we have a lot of work to do collectively. Look forward to doing it interactively, so appreciate that. All right, so the next item that we want to talk about is equally difficult. It certainly doesn't get any easier, and that's the capital discussion. Again, I think what we need is a comprehensive look. And again, I don't have a lot to talk about tonight about this, but I know in discussions with Maria and Eric that the town's priority list is being worked on. And so it'll be very, very important to set that out. Matt, we've discussed where you guys are and where your recommendation is. We need to put that in and model it, and as we've done. And it's going, when we add in the baseline maintenance for some of the schools and the rest, we're going to have to make some hard choices about timing. We're going to have to do what has to be done. But there's been so much work done on the Latimer Lane, Henry James, that we need to really be very analytical about that and how we'll finance it and what that bond looks like and how that impacts the debt service cap going forward, with an open mind about how we get through all of that. So I'm not sure what the exact timeline for all of that will be, but we'll have another meeting about that. Any other comments on capital? Okay. The last
Rob,
topic.
sorry. I had
Yeah.
one.
Okay,
Sorry.
go ahead. That's all right.
I think we've all sort of said multiple times is we just don't, it's very hard to even judge where capital is. I assume you're going to show the charts on debt service at some point, but to even have the conversation without having a real CIP, the CIP is going to change so dramatically when we add the master planning for the Board of Ed and the town that it's hard to even judge how we're going to fit this in. But the one thing I would request all boards to do is please prioritize your capital, because this is going to be a year that's going to go fluid where we're going to have to make choices. And it would be helpful if you all have prioritized them as we come down to the line as to what we can afford and when we can afford it. As Rob said, it doesn't mean if we don't do it this year, it doesn't mean it's never gets done, but
Right.
There may be a timing issue as to when we do it. Rob, were you going to show the debt service charts and sort of what that
Well,
looks like?
they're too scary. I didn't want to do that.
I think you should show them. I think you should.
All right. Amy, can you put those up? All right, Amy, I'm going to let you drive here. Just so explain what we've got here that we're looking at.
Yeah, so this is basically your maintenance, so to speak, capital plan. So there's no new projects included in this capital plan. This is just everything from the prior plan, information from the Tecton study, and this is what our baseline needs look like as of right now, prior to doing any actual capital planning where we go through, prioritize for the next 6 years. It's just basically the town's current plan from last year move forward, and then the Board of Ed stuff based on the Tecton recommendations. Like mentioned earlier, this is going to change because we do have our Tecton study on the town side. We do not have the results available yet, so this will change. And then the second slide is if we were to take all of our baseline needs and then add in the Board of Ed capital project for the Henry James and the Latimer.
So you can see that in 26 through 30, we're well above the 10% target line. And there are assumptions in here about how the budget grows overall, but these are concerning numbers. Now, there are levers to push. I think we have fairly long-term bonding anticipated for the combined Latimer Lane sixth grade issue, that's sixth grade at Henry James. And when those projects come online also has an impact. And of course, we have lots of room out in 2036 through to 40 to make this up. But there are only a limited number of ways that we can smooth this curve meaningfully. So that's why it's important to put these projects into a priority.
And Rob, can I just add, to put it in sort of a context, if you'll see the debt service is 7%, and up there it gets close to 17%. So every 2 million you increase in debt service, so if you go to 7% to 9%, that's about $2 million, and every $2 million is a mill. So you're looking at a 5 mil increase in some of these out years. And every mill increase for the median taxpayer is about $245. So you're starting to see the impact on the taxpayer. And that doesn't even include your normal, what Sean mentioned, your normal service cost increase. So that's on top of the normal service cost increase. So it's adding an additional $250 to what you're already going to go up, which is why this is going to be such a challenge. But to Rob's point, it's not impossible, but the problem is timing may become a bigger issue. And we have asked Amy, and I think she's working to schedule our bond advisor, because some of this is about how you structure the debt. and when you pay the interest and when you pay the principal. And there are multiple ways to structure the debt. It doesn't have to be constant over time. So we can work with our bond counsel to do that, but that's super complicated. But the magnitude of the problem, you can see we're going from 7% to almost 17% debt service. And what that means for mills, that's 5 mills, that's $1,250,000 increase from where we are on top of our normal operating budget growth. So that's sort of the magnitude of the problem. If you put it in terms of the way we think in terms of mill and what does it mean for the taxpayer.
Lisa, it's Chris, just as you mentioned, if you don't mind, or you brought up perspective, maybe somebody else can answer this as well, but if you were to take this nightmare here and move it back 10 years or 20 years, what would have been another time where we were significantly above? Like, give me a point of reference. Not that that's at all okay that we did it before, so therefore we can get to such a position again, but maybe what may have been a point in time where we were so above.
Sure.
And what would we tackle at that point?
So there was a time when the town's population went from 5,000, of course, we're now at 25, where we had massive growth. But we also had massive grantless growth that supported some of these expenditures. So that, I don't think we've ever been at a point where we're looking at massive capital growth without concomitant grantless growth. So I don't recall that, but I could be wrong on that. But that's sort of in terms of the context. Now, we have typically gone a little bit above the debt service line periodically, and we generally do one major project every 15 years. And that's how we've done it for time in memoriam, because that enables you to plan your debt and keep that debt service constant, and therefore the mill rate relatively stable. Now, if we are in a point of massive growth or massive need, there are also ways to structure debt differently than perhaps we've done it in the past. Not saying going the derivative way, but there are ways to do debt structure and time your interest and principal so that to make that a little smoother over time. Is that advisable? That's a different discussion, but there are certainly ways to do that. And so that will be part of the discussion. We haven't really delved into that yet until we know what the perspective is. So that's sort of how I see it. Now, there are certainly, and Amy, you can double check, when I looked at AAA towns, the highest I saw debt service for a AAA town was 10%. I don't know if there are others that have higher than that. We're looking at 17 here. I think we can all agree we're probably not going to go to 17% debt service. Some towns in the West let 20% in debt service, but I'm not sure they're AAA. And the question is, do we want to take on that kind of debt? Those are policy decisions for the Board of Ed, the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Finance. It actually gets to us, and then our residents, because we're asking residents to commit to projects 15 and 20 years down the line, when the average resident, or it used to be, stayed in town about 10 years. So those are sort of the things we weigh. It doesn't mean we can't do it or we can't do all of it, but it does go into when we do it and the timing of it and how we structure the debt. So those will all be part of the conversation. And there are levers we can pull to make this better. But can we do it all? No. But I was reading a book on budgeting by the ICMA, and they said one of the things, you always get asked for more capital than you can afford. And that's the challenge of great boards and great managers. How do you then take more needs than you can afford and make it? And that's what families do every year. So it's no different than what a normal family does. It's a little bit harder because we're talking huge numbers, but it's not impossible, but it will involve sort of timing, planning, and prioritizing.
So are we in this position because we had put off the big projects for such a long time?
No.
Latimer Lane has been on capital plan and moving around for 15 years. Henry James moved around for 15 years. The senior center has moved around. So is this what's put us in this bad position, is we've put off all these projects for so long?
So I don't think so. I mean, we've been doing them every 10 to 15 years, 10-year bonding or 15-year bonding as they come up. As we were planning on it, we could have afforded what we had in the CIP. You guys had $9 million. We could do that. It's just this has exploded to now probably 4 or 5 times that. based on the needs assessment. So we had planned to do this over time. It's just the the parameters of what we want to do or need to do have changed. So it's not from lack of planning. We have always planned for that. And we do a major project every 15 years, $30 to $40 million project every 15 years. That's what you time it. So when the high school payments fall off, that's when we did Henry James. We were planning to do Latimer a little bit earlier because it was only 9 million. But if it's a 30 million project, you do that at the end of Henry James, and then you do the next $30 to $40 million project. And that's how you do it. And most of our buildings have a 30-year life. So if you plan this out well, it's very doable. So, but times, to your point, Susan, you gave a great explanation of how times have changed and education is changing. And the needs of buildings are perhaps different than they've been in the past. And it's changing more rapidly. Unfortunately, it's changing more rapidly at a time where our grand list is not changing rapidly. It's not growing. And we're in the classic grow or die situation of small towns relying on property tax. So it goes to a broader discussion of how we fund education generally. And doing it by property taxes, we can see today, is a terrible way to do it, to rely on it for the majority of the funding.
All right. So a lot more to come on that topic.
Rob, do you have thoughts on a timeline for this meeting on capital?
Well, I guess I would ask Maria and or Eric to say, I'd like to do it together with the town. I know you guys are ahead of the town in terms of what you want to do and when you want to do it, Matt.
Well, we still need, we have a schedule on an annual basis where we'll get with Maria's office and collaborate and start to prioritize things as well. So I'm just trying big picture to figure out.
I think it's a January meeting. Am I correct about that, Maria, or not?
Yeah, so again, during the month of January is probably when we're digging in most on the budget, but that our capital budget usually isn't refined until sometime in February. And then I present to the Board of Selectmen at the end of February.
So this, I'm grimacing because this is the danger we have if we wait too long to do this, is that it's always an afterthought. We get one snowed out meeting for one of the boards or the other, and then we don't get to it. We do it at a combined meeting, and it doesn't happen. It's really important. So I don't.
Can I make a suggestion? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Just quickly, I was going to say that we do have, our 6-year capital plan as well as our 6-year CNR plan. And I don't envision major changes, to that. So if we just wanted to sort of say for discussion purposes and work off of what's in our adopted budget for the current year, looking ahead, at least on the town side of things, I think once we have the facilities master plan, we'll be a bit more informed on some of that infrastructure. But just in terms of, a discussion, conversation purposes, if you wanted to meet sooner than February, we could always just work with what we currently have in the plan for discussion purposes.
All right, so let me reach out and see if we can't find a time we could do this. I'd like to do it in the second, third week of January, even though we'd be in the middle of the budget then. I know that's hard on everybody, but.
And will the Board of Selectmen have the master plan done by then, the one that you've been working on for the last couple of years? Really looking forward?
Yeah, the facilities master plan, we actually started in the spring of this year. And we do anticipate having it done in time for our budgeting process. And then the Parks and Rec master plan was completed and the final presentation was presented to the Board of Selectmen in October. So again, those were two pretty critical planning documents that, we felt we needed to complete for capital budgeting purposes.
So that'll be ready by January.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Maria, I guess when you said using the current CIP, my concern about doing that is that's going to go out the window in terms of 7%. If you have this kind of recommendations that the Board of Ed had, we'll have to reprioritize that. But are you saying just use the dollar amount and you'll reprioritize during the year? Is that your thinking there?
No, I mean, again, if you just want to have sort of a long-term, discussions, generate some ideas. I think we can kind of work with our existing and know that, it's not going to, at that point, have obviously the facilities master plan. And we had some recommendation from the draft Parks and Rec master plan that was incorporated into the current capital document. But again, I mean, just for, planning purposes, again, if it's about having a discussion, throwing around some ideas, I would say we could work with existing. But realistically, I will not have our capital budget ready before February. And it's usually middle of February, even sometimes closer to end of February.
But you're not anticipating a $30 million project or an additional $2 million per year, correct?
Well, again, we're not looking at adding major infrastructure to our inventory. It would just be, renovating existing. And again, we'll have a better, assessment and understanding of what those building needs are when we do have, the results of the facilities master plan.
And so so I'm sorry, I'm being dense. So will the facilities master plan be done by mid-January when Rob wants to meet?
No.
Yeah, the facilities master plan will have enough data to use for our capital budgeting planning this winter. So
it's not so much about budgeting for this year, but for the long haul that we're trying to get at.
Yeah.
So that will be done for January.
Okay. Nonetheless, we'll try to get a date, a target date or a target week when we could try to do this. Let me work on that. All right. All right. Moving on to the last topic on our agenda is the Parks and Rec Special Revenue Fund discussion. We invited Jerry Wetson and Dave Bush tonight because this was a topic at our Board of Finance. It's fairly specific to Parks and Rec and the Simsbury Farms Special Revenue Fund. I'd like not to have this get down too far into the weeds, but I think we had said that we wanted to at least give them an opportunity to speak to it. Let me just say that from my position as chairman of the Board of Finance, what I would like to see ultimately, the end game here should be to have a picture of what we have spent, what we have received in revenues, the amount of support that the town has, the general fund has supplied to the Parks and Rec overall budget, and compare that, actual last year, budget this year, budget next year. There seems to be a lot of discussion about the geography of where these funds are accounted and how that impacts budget increase percentages. That seems to miss the point to me. The point seems to be that we have there's been general fund transfers in support of the revenue fund. There have been shortfalls beyond that. There's been programs and there's overhead that's allocated. And I guess it seems to me like we ought to unscramble the omelet and be able to figure out a way to do this. But that's the context in which maybe I could ask Jerry or Dave to just give a quick overview.
Hey, Rob, this is Sean. If I could jump in, I chaired that subcommittee. So if you hit me, I'd love to give you the report.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. So again, the order that I thought the subcommittee was given from discussions with the Board of Finance in the past and the Board of Selectmen was, quote unquote, to fix the revenue fund problem, right? And you and I were on a prior subcommittee where we tried to do the same, et cetera. We came to you with a recommendation prior to basically dissolve the entirety of the fund and put it in the Board of Selectmen budget. The Board of Finance hadn't had time to digest that. It got very confusing. And there was some frustration. So we backed away from that and put the fund back where it was and continued on the way with me standing in front of you, promising you to solve the problem, meaning that you were continuing to have to fund it through general fund transfers, and that it was an accounting issue. So the subcommittee set out with two members of the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and Revenue and Simsbury Farms Parks and Rec, David and Jerry, to solve the problem once and for all. So I'll spare you the details, but we had some really good discussions. We had Linda and Art, had offered that the perspective, and it was right, that if all three bodies gave, we could potentially solve the problem. I think you used some similar words prior, and that was the path we were charging down. What was on the table was, do you reallocate? Do you dissolve? Do you dissolve part of it? Because at the end of the day, we wanted transparency, as I think the Board of Finance does, for where the expenditures are coming from, where the revenues are, who's paying for it. And I think it was somewhat frustrating that the taxpayers are essentially funding the shortfall after the fact, and it's not a budgeted item. Again, after a lot of discussion, debate, difference of opinions and perspective, I believe it was a 4-2 decision to recommend, and all it is a recommendation to the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen, I would say, to remove basically the Simsbury Farm Complex, with the exception of the golf course, from the revenue fund, insert it into the Culture, Parks and Rec portion of the Board of Selectmen budget, and then account for the revenues. Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, within how we account for the additional revenues outside of taxes within the budgetary process. And we were debating whether it was 200 or 300 or 500 was the right number. And again, not necessarily material, but that the intent was to get it so that we were budgeting for the expenditures with an understanding that there was revenues, and that there was possibly a $200,000 to $400,000 hole that was already there by virtue of you're having to transfer at year end to close that gap. We were now basically budgeting for that hole. And Amy, correct me if I'm wrong on any of the accounting from that discussion, but that was essentially the recommendation in the context of trying to solve the problem. Now, we fully appreciate that this may not be the year to do that because it puts pressure on budgets, et cetera. But in the task of trying to solve the overall issue of having to clean that fund up every year at the end, that was, I believe, the intent of our recommendation. And again, anyone else on the subcommittee, please jump in and correct me where I'm wrong there.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Amy, can you clarify, please? I think, and I'm trying to search for it at the same time, we actually do budget 180 transfer during the budget process. Isn't that correct, through a transfer?
Yes.
Yeah.
We do. This is the 200 over and above that, Lisa.
So when I was looking at the numbers, it looked like we're short total 250 and we budget 180. So I'm seeing a $70,000 problem. Why are you seeing a bigger problem than that? What am I missing?
Lisa, can I just, before Sean answers that question, I would like to graciously excuse those members of the Board of Education, if you would like not.
Sorry, guys.
Not to go through the torture of this discussion. And thank you for coming. Really appreciate it and look forward to our dialogue going forward. You are, however, welcome to stay if you want the entertainment value of the next 10 or 15 minutes. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sean,
I'm going to give Amy credit for offering, suggesting that. She saw the tortured looks on your face.
yeah, because this year you were on the fund was only short 15,000. So to me, that's a solved problem. I get that this was because of COVID, so that may not be a long-term solve, but there's always going to be some coming and going because of weather. Some years you're going to have great weather, no rain. You're going to have excess in the fund. Some years you're going to have terrible weather and there's going to be a deficit. So there's going to be some variable in there. The question is, how do you budget for that? And that's same with any revenue. It's an estimate and you do your best, but it looked like when I saw your summaries, it looks like we were only, and this is from some of you describing it to me, we've been in deficit absent the 180. I mean, including the 180, about 4 times a year out of the last 10, Amy?
4 years out of the last 10.
Right. So it's not an every year thing. And we already budget 180 as a transfer. So that says to me, maybe there's a 70,000 deficit.
We're trying to avoid the unbudgeted need to fill a remaining gap at the end. And I really don't want to get down too much further into the weeds, but I would ask one question. What is the logic behind leaving the golf course out of this instead of shifting the whole thing to the town budget?
So, Rob, I can speak to that. I mean, this has become a philosophical discussion, I guess is what it is. The golf course has been asked to do business as a business. It's been asked to operate as a business. The pool, the rink, the programs, the day camps, those things are community service, just like what are offered at the library and the senior center, and they're not being treated as such. You can't operate those programs without increasing the fees significantly, with including our utilities and our overhead from staff salaries and benefits, et cetera, from the administrative end of things, without increasing those user fees to the end users that are day camp parents, families, pool families, whatever. This is, again, seasonal rates are going up, whatever. The golf course should be in its own fund because it's asked to operate differently than the rest of the town funds do. If we're going to ask it to operate as a business, it should be left, those profits that the golf course generates should be left with the golf course. If the town chooses to sweep that fund, if it gets too big, that's certainly understandable. But to take this past year with COVID, the golf course had a great year, but it's going to be subsidizing the pool and the rink on the other side and the day camp program loss. And so you're basically we're going to end up having to raise fees as the golf course expenses continue to increase with their salaries and benefits and general operating costs. Those fees are being raised even as the golf course is making money. I mean, at some point, where's the tipping point here?
And that answers Lisa's question, because the golf course isn't coming. That's why there's a different hole. Is the money?
So now I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish tonight, but other than to say, it's not clear to me whose decision this is to make. It sounds like
it's ours. It's the Board of Finance.
It's ultimately yours. We would make the recommendation in the Board of Selectmen budget, and you would either approve it or line item and change it. And what we were trying to do is avoid this discussion in April when we don't have time to do it. It was to do the research and give the options. And again, the idea was to leave the excess revenues with the golf course, and the idea was for the golf course to continue to not fully self-sustain for major capital items, but continue to self-sustain for small and perhaps medium items with that excess revenue, and to deal with the weather. And that, as Tom just said, philosophically, that we would offer skating and pool services, et cetera, as part of recreation, and more transparently or simpler to understand, put it in as an expenditure on the town side, account for the revenue, and understand that essentially it's going to cost the taxpayers for it directly versus after the fact. It's a suggestion. There's no magic bullet here, which is why we've been doing this for 8 years trying to figure it out. But the idea was, Rob, is to get it off your agenda from having to do a transfer every year was essentially the goal of the committee.
So, Sean, is the gap 70,000? I mean, that's the first question. What is the gap?
No, the gap is not 70,000 unless the golf course comes with it, I believe. Because the money from the golf course stays, the gap, and that's where we're debating, Lisa, to your point, and Amy, correct me on the math here, but the gap is larger as a result of that.
So my perspective on this, Sean, is the same as it is on everything else. It's a very tight budget year. Anything you do that's going to increase taxes, you can do that, but then you have to cut somewhere else in your budget. You go through your priorities. What are your top things you want to accomplish? And if making this change is what you want to do, I would be open to it, although I have some concerns about taxpayers subsidizing camp.
To be clear, it doesn't. That would not subsidize the camps, Lisa.
No, what they're subsidizing, Lisa, is the cost of the administration. Okay. Whether it's the supervisor running it, it's no different than the senior programmer at the library or the adult and children's librarians, head librarians. They're coordinating a program that's offered at no cost at those facilities. What we're saying is the direct cost for the program participant should be the on-site staff, the seasonals, the materials, the advertising, the credit card processing, not the salary and benefits and the utilities going on at Simsbury Farms from the full-time staff.
Yeah, but some
So just, can I
utilities-
just,
Those still
Can
have
I
to be
interrupt for a
budgeted.
second?
Yeah. So
can I just throw something in? Tom, you said earlier that the golf this past year ended up subsidizing the loss in the camps and the pool and so I think that's why Lisa's asking that question, because she heard you say the loss. So are you saying there was no loss?
There's going to be an operating loss because we didn't bring in as much revenue. We couldn't have as many campers. We couldn't have as many people in the pool. And now with the rink, with the governor's restrictions on the winter sports, we're saying we're going to see a revenue reduction there as well.
Yeah. Of course, this year is not a good year to look at. Nothing is normal.
The direct expenditures were covered by the campers, correct? Or they were not?
No, the camp still made money. It didn't make money on the pace that it normally does.
Correct. So
They covered its expenses.
Correct.
Okay.
Direct.
The direct expenses.
It didn't cover the expenses in the budget.
Correct. What Lisa is driving at, Linda, what you're getting at is there's two buckets of expenses. There's the totality of it, and there's what is being viewed as the direct expense to set the camp up and do it. If we don't have a camp, there's still all these expenses that exist, right? So the campers aren't paying, are currently contributing to that. And again, that's the philosophical discussion. But to Rob's plea for us not to go down the budget rabbit hole, getting back up again, I'm not suggesting we necessarily do this, Lisa. I get it. But again, this has been a point of frustration for the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, the town manager, First Select people, as to how do we fund recreation in this community? And this subcommittee was charged with offering a potential solution. I'm very okay with shelving it and looking at it at a different point. But at some point, we need to make a decision if we're going to do it differently or if we're going to continue to be in the same conundrum of, is it 70, is it 200, is it whatever it is, it's still going to be something every year until we account for it differently.
Or half the years. But the point I was just trying to make is if it's a priority of your boards, put it in with all your other priorities and pick which ones make it to the budget process as a part of your 1% or 1.5% or 2% or whatever we guide you over time on. It's just one of the many priorities. If we were starting from scratch and developing your budget, the town budget from scratch, we would all do it wholly differently than it is. But we have to take it as it is. And right now at least I'm focused on not doing a major tax increase this year because of the extraordinary circumstances the world is in.
Right. So
You and I agree on that. I just want to be clear, though, is the Board of Finance, I'll be careful with it, but did demand that we offer a solution. So this is not a Board of Selectmen driven subcommittee. This was born out of a frustration from the Board of Finance having to deal with this problem every year. So I just want to make sure we understand where the priorities are coming from.
The priority is not form over substance. The priority is that all of the expected expenditures and revenues for the combined efforts are accounted for in the budget somewhere, either in the special revenue fund or as a line item in the Board of Selectmen's budget that doesn't require a subsequent allocation at the end unless there are material extenuating circumstances.
That's correct.
And what we're saying to you, Rob, is unless we increase the fees to an exorbitant point, which would drive away users and we would have a different problem, we can't revenue our way to the solution here.
No, but you're going to have a budget item in the Board of Selectmen's budget for the allocated expenses and the direct expenses that aren't covered by fees. And those are going to be in the Board of Selectmen budget.
We can do that, yes, but as we've talked about, there's a revenue shortfall that comes with doing that you're essentially budgeting for the shortfall.
No, you're asking, it's going to be taxed to the taxpayers.
Correct. Yes.
That's the only place it comes from.
Right.
We either get there at the beginning of the budget process or we do a special allocation at the end of the budget of the year when we're short. I want to get to Chris. Chris, you have a question.
Going in the spirit of what you asked not to do, I'm going to, for the first time, probably listen to somebody, not talk about the numbers. I want us to push forward to you a recommendation of how to solve this so we don't return to it in the future. Okay, so whether or not we enact it, Lisa, in this year, which I agree. I'm not asking, because my solution does push forward the issue to the taxpayers. The way that we don't do that is, before we get to the taxpayers, is that we make difficult decisions around programming costs around that. But what I want to do is accomplish something as an organized group who put a lot of effort, because it is important to get this figured out for the future, because we're continuing to stumble on it. And the reason why it will, if we just step back and don't take action, or don't materially listen to each other and say, this is what we should do, what's going to happen, whether it's a good or a bad year, is this board's going to change. The people who constitute these two boards are going to change. And in April, when the question comes up, why are we doing this, and why is that program not working, and why is the golf course not subsidized? All of that hysteria is going to continue.
Starts all over again.
That's a completely inefficient.
I think Chris got it right. So you are in a position to make a recommendation to us, and I appreciate that. The only thing I would ask is that the one thing I disagree with you, Tom, about, and Sean to a certain extent, is there needs to be a fundamental encouragement or program whereby users of the service pay their fair share before we put the balance on the taxpayers. There has to be some incentive in whatever structure you recommend to set the fees for use appropriately higher, if appropriate, in a way that makes sense.
Rob, 100% agree with you. That's the way we've been doing business up there for 20 years. What I was trying to get at is, it's getting to the point, again, with minimum wage being a large driver that's going up, you can only raise the fees so much before you get to that point where no one can afford the program anymore. And if the goal
I will challenge that. Tom, show me that. I challenge that. Not to be in the weeds, but I challenge that.
Okay.
The private golf courses around here did assessments this year, big time assessments, because they couldn't.
Not a private facility. That's a whole different ballgame. We are competing with the public facilities in this state. And if we price ourselves, which I've already seen some figures that we're prepared to be pricing ourselves out, that's going to then in turn reduce revenue, and in turn reduce the quality of the product we can turn out, which then in turn reduces what we can charge. This is something, one of the things I've been quietly listening to is we have a capital problem coming in the next 3 years that's extraordinary for this town. If we don't fix this now, we're never going to fix it. And all we're going to watch is the gem of this town deteriorate, because we won't have the back end money that you've been very generous to provide us to balance the needs based upon the accounting changes that were made before my time, before your time. Let's fix the problem. Just as Chris said, it's time to fix a problem. We were charged with that. We've made that recommendation. And although we have a lot of competing interests, I just really beg that you folks see it's time to fix the problem, and then you won't hear from us. We will go and be our own self-sustaining unit, except for capital projects.
So, Dave, I would say whether the problem is fixed or not is rests with the Board of Selectmen, because they're going to have to make cuts elsewhere to fix the problem and not impact the taxpayers. So that's a conversation to have with them. We do appreciate everything you guys do. As you know, I love it down there. So it's not all on you. Some of this is going to be on the Board of Selectmen and where they prioritize it. And then the question is, how do we put it in? Maybe it's a plan over 5 years. And we, just like we did with the pension, you plan for it. But the key is to get to the right number. And I'm still not convinced I know what the gap is. To me, in my head, it's $70,000. And that's pretty doable over, 3 to 4 years. So I think this is fixable. I think Rob's looking at it, and Linda and Art, I want to congratulate you on your efforts and really informing our board. Really appreciate the updates you have given us and the thought and the time you taken with me to explain all of this. So it's not an insurmountable problem. It's really only 70,000, or sort of the acute problem is 70,000. If you want to do a bigger solve, that's a bigger number, but maybe that takes 10 years. So there's timing issues, and then it's priorities of the Board of Selectmen. What do they want to put forward first is the things they want to do. I hope they're going to put forward taking care of the pension, because they made promises and they need to keep those promises. And I suspect that's going to be a top priority for them. And then after that, along with this year, of course, the pandemic expenses are going to be way up there. So
Can I ask a question, Rob, Mr. Chairman? I thought you said that pension was getting taken care of outside of the budget. Now it's within the 1.5. I thought you led off the discussion that you were going to review that with the Board of Finance in addition to the 1.5, not encompassing the 1.5, because I believe that chews up an entirety of 1.5.
We want you to do your expense budget within the 1.5.
Inclusive of the pension changes?
No.
Okay.
I hear that as hard cost. I hear that. Thank you. I hear that as just our hard cost budget. Okay.
I appreciate that clarification. And then, Lisa, I agree with you that the challenge we have, and again, I get that there's competing priorities, but we started the special revenue solve meetings off with all three boards we're going to give. And the guidance we got back is that we had to solve the problem entirely within the guidance that we were going to get from the Board of Finance. So it's going to be very challenging to do it in this current year, given the guidance, not impossible, but current challenging. And that if you're open to a multi-year solution, that may be something we can work with.
No, it's something that we would appreciate as well, is that we don't like having to come back to you folks every year, kind of hat in hand. If this takes 3 years to do, let's put it in writing. Let's create the numbers so that everybody understands, and let's fix it. But to kick this can down the road with what, again, I've heard, and I appreciate Derek's comments about all the trouble businesses are having. We want to operate as a business that has a fair accounting practice like every other business. And right now, we're not being allowed to do that.
With the caveat that unless there's a capital project and you need money, then you want to come back to it. So, I mean, that's not truly running like it's quasi private business, but that's my only question. At what, where does the spigot really, turn off? Has it been consistently outperforming the rest of the Simsbury Farms, the golf program, or are there going to be times when the golf course is not necessarily being subsidized by the rest of Simsbury Farms? But again, I'm wondering I don't see anything changing in terms of having to come back by separating the golf program from the rest of Simsbury Farms. I don't know what that accomplishes. Am I missing something? Am I not connecting the dots here?
Capital's never been part of the budget for the revenue fund. The capital has always been a separate item based on municipal financing. The revenue fund was generated or essentially expected to run its operating costs and match that up with its expenses.
So, and I'll just to clarify, because for Derek and others, one of the costs that has been proposed to be moved back to the Board of Selectmen is the utility and facility costs. So that's aside from capital costs. Those are sort of the day-to-day utility and facility costs. So those also would not be borne by the user fees, but rather by the taxpayers.
Linda, just to clarify that, it's the utilities at the Simsbury Farms main building, not the utilities involved with the restaurant and the golf clubhouse.
Right, but what about the utilities for the rink and the pool? That would go to the Board of Selectmen. So the rink and the pool users would not be paying their own utility costs under your proposal. Is that correct?
Correct, but we would still do our best to set our fees at the market rate and what the residents could afford, reasonably afford, toward that electricity and staff cost with those.
So one thing, just to follow up on that, Tom, that I've got in the way of feedback too is, I know you're concerned about affordability of the fees, and we're concerned about affordability of the taxes, but I share your concern about affordability for lower income people, but not for upper income people. Isn't there a way to create an income-based scholarship program for those who can't afford the higher fees if you were to raise them so that they could cover those costs? I mean, if we're always suppressing fees so that lower income people can afford them, then upper income people who could readily afford them are also benefiting. And taxpayers are subsidizing everybody.
So
Who don't need
I'm
it.
just, I'm going to jump in here and say those are the kind of discussions that need to be had, but not tonight.
Well, we did have them at length. Believe me, we had them.
I know you did. And we're not going to go back over all of those tonight because the salmon's in the oven and I've got to get dinner. But I know Maria wanted to say something, and I'd like to bring this to a conclusion. So
thanks. Well, hopefully my remarks will help us bring it in conclusion. And I can also wrap back to Linda's question about an income-based sort of fee schedule or fee waiver program, as I have some experience with that in the past and developing an ordinance on that topic. But I'm just going to be really candid with you all. This is a topic I'm really passionate about. I've had experience dealing with a Parks and Rec revenue fund that was in crisis. Our revenue fund, as it was set up, is set up for failure. And that is because our program participants are subsidizing community use expenditures. I think that the analysis we prepared and presented clearly shows that it's not that the taxpayers are subsidizing the Parks and Rec department. It's actually the other way around. And what I had shared in the work group, and I think this is a really good comparison to help people get their arms around it. When we have program participants who go to the library or they go to the senior center, we're not asking our program participants at those buildings to help keep the lights on, to help keep the buildings heated, to pay for supplies in the bathrooms, to pay for the elevator when it breaks down. But the way that our revenue fund was set up, that's exactly what we're asking our program users to pay for. Our taxpayers are not supporting the day-to-day operating maintenance expenses of our Simsbury Farms complex. That is fully being borne by our Parks and Recreation program participants. And we do not ask that of any other program participant in this town. So it really is an equity issue. And the way that that's structured, we're going to continue to have systemic deficits within the Parks and Rec fund. And so we did show that at a minimum, that gap right now is probably about $160,000, and that incrementally over time, we could work to close that gap. Again, there are ways to do that. We recommended some different solutions. This is not something we should try to fix in one budget year or to fix overnight, but taking a slow and steady approach, closing that gap, we can get there. But I think that, again, it's that recognition of we do have an equity problem, but it's that our program participants are actually, in fact, subsidizing the community use or really our taxpayers. And so, again, I think that's something that we'll continue to work on.
Maria, I was just going to say on the equity issue. So I see it a little differently than you in the library. If I don't participate in a program for a fee, I can use the library for free, right? Or at the senior center, I can go to the library. I don't have to pay the fee to do the gym class. I can still go there. So that's a community use. But at the pool, if I don't pay a fee, I can't use the pool. On the tennis courts, if I pay a fee, I pay for the instructor. But if I'm not taking a class, I can just go use the tennis court if it's not being used. That's a community use. But for the pool, nobody can use the pool unless they pay a fee. So in that case, the users are actually paying for the use and not the taxpayers. Yeah. So I view that as a little different. Maybe the skating rink, you would say differently. If you're going to start offering free skate, maybe that's different. And same with the golf course. I view that as a fee thing. Yeah, that's different than a tennis court, which is sometimes used for programming, but sometimes anybody can use it. And I agree that the taxpayer should pay for the part that's not being programmed. So I view that a little differently than you do, but I think the concept you're articulating is worth considering, and we may look at the proportions of it, but I don't think taxpayers should be supporting something they can't use unless they pay a fee for.
Well, and that complex, if you think about it, but there are a lot of opportunities for people to use that complex, whether it's without a fee, whether it's the basketball courts, the playground, If they're not getting instruction, the tennis courts, the paddleball courts, the walking trail, the complex does get a lot of use from program participants as
That's
well.
why I was distinguishing that from the pool and
the rink.
of course, yeah,
And
and
the rink.
possibly the rink, depending on whether you're going to offer free skate or not. Those are different than the other parts you're mentioning. So I see those as distinct analyses.
And I would also just really like to encourage folks to take a look in particular. There was a chart that Amy had circulated to everybody that we presented as part of the Parks and Rec Revenue Fund work group that showed the historic average of the sort of back end transfers that we've been doing. And I think it's important to know that for many years, deficits were just building up and not necessarily being taken care of every year. That's not a good budgeting practice. So that's something that we have cleaned up the last few years. We are taking care of those deficits and cleaning those up on an annual basis. But when we looked at it over a period of time, again, that's where we're finding that gap is a minimum of about $160,000. And so our taxpayers are essentially still paying for that, but they're doing so through that that additional revenue that you're not budgeting for on the front end. So then on the back end, and I just don't think that's necessarily a transparent way of budgeting. And so that was something else that the work group had talked about extensively in terms of how we might be able to do that more proactively on the front end and be more transparent to our taxpayers about that. And so there was some information in the packet, and if folks didn't have a chance to take a look at it, I would just encourage you to do so. And then the last point, sorry, Rob, I was really waiting a while.
I'm sorry. Maria, you said so you think the gap is 160, not
at least. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
and
I see 180 in addition to the 180.
So I don't see that from the numbers when you looked at the comparison. So I'd be interested in getting a more detailed analysis as to why you think that, because we've never done those kind of transfers on the back end. So I'm not sure where that is coming from. So that's what I'd like to sort of get a handle on.
Lisa, you've transferred several $100,000 past.
In the committee, the recommendation at the end was a contribution of $277,500 to come from the general fund. That was scenario number 2. So it was an even larger number. So we got a lot of numbers floating around out there.
All right. So yes.
Yeah, and then just the last piece, if you ever did want to look at sort of that income-based approach, so one way that you can tackle it is through a fee waiver ordinance. And the downside is that adds more cost to the general fund. So if you were providing, an eligibility program where based on a household's income, they could qualify, say, for perhaps 25% off, 50% off, whatever we, felt, maybe it's multiple tiers, whatever that is coming from the general fund, though. So the general fund would typically provide the funding for that program. Otherwise, again, you're just putting a further burden on the program participants. So it's something that's doable, it's feasible. Other communities have implemented it, but it's another general fund cost.
Maria, it doesn't have to be. In the past, social services has paid a bunch of scholarships to children participating in programming or the pools. So there is another non-taxable pool of money as well to fund scholarships that has been used in the past.
Right. But that's a much smaller scale. If you were to do like a true income-based, eligibility-based approach, it would be a much bigger scale than doing that through social services donations.
All right. So I want to bring this conversation to a conclusion, which is we need a recommendation from the Board of Selectmen of what you suggest we do. And I think the task force has one. And if the Board of Selectmen recommended, then you should send it to us with all of the details. What we're asking tonight as a Board of Finance is that all of the costs, including the transfers at the beginning, transfers in the budget and transfers we make at the end, are accounted for in the 21-22 budget somewhere.
But Rob, that's part of the 15%.
Yes.
I'm not okay going higher in taxes this year.
Right.
And again, I need clarification on whether you're willing to work with us on that being multi-year or if it's truly in the 1.5, Lisa, because those are two different things.
I'm willing to work on you multi-year. I don't think you have to do it right away, just like we did with overtime in the police. That's a 3-year process to get that to an appropriate level. So to me, it seems that what I would like from Maria is perhaps a phone call. Maria, if we could arrange that so you can explain what the gap is, because my accounting is not showing the gap you're coming up with. So I'm not understanding those numbers, and I have looked at all the materials you provided, and I'm still not understanding that. So if that would be okay, I would appreciate that.
All right. I think that is enough for tonight. A good meeting, very good meeting. Passionate meeting, which is good. People are passionate about a lot of these things both ways. It's necessary. But I will fall back on the fact we need to work together and realize that we need a common goal, a common budget that represents all of the stakeholders in our town. And so I know we will all work hard towards that end. So with that, I'd be looking for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Good meeting.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Kumbaya.